It's a great pleasure for me to talk once again to an old friend and one of the true legends in broadcast history, the man who held down the fort as a White House correspondent for ABC for many years. And it's a pleasure to talk to Mr. Sam Donaldson. Sam,
Well, Mike, we knew each other for a long time. We worked together for a long time. But you, as a great foreign correspondent, the one who knew the world, one reported from the places that are still strange to many Americans. I was in Washington. I was at the mothership. I was at the place where things were easy. It wasn't easy for you. But I remember well seeing you on the air and saying to myself, there's a guy who knows how to do it.
well, thank you, Sam. I always thought of us as me looking at the world from the gutter up and you sitting there right in the control room and seeing how it works. But I want to get your feeling about these reports we've been reading about self-censorship throughout the media, but in particular at the White House. How do you react to that?
The atmosphere that I worked in was so much different from the atmosphere that reporters work in today in Washington, D.C. A lot of factors for that. I didn't have the internet for a long time. I didn't have a competition for a long time. There were three major networks, and if you wanted news from abroad, from someplace other than around the corner, you had to watch ABC, CBS, or NBC. And all of us tried to do the stories that we thought were important. And the second thing is we were allowed to do it. We didn't have management which said, just a moment, and that's a sensitive material thing. We're trying to have a buyout with another company, and I think the FCC not approved, so you can't say that. No one in 47 years of working for ABC News ever told me that I couldn't say what I wanted to say, as long as it was accurate, as long as I checked my facts. But there was never a political pressure, and there was never an idea for a long time that we had to make a lot of money. When I first started in the business in the early 60s, Mike, the three networks considered their news departments what CBS called their jewel on the crown. It didn't have to make money. It had the prestige. Walter Cronkite was there. Huntley Brinkley was there at NBC. And the owners could go up to Capitol Hill and say to the tax committee, for instance, well, the senator, we need a little help on something like this. And the senator would always say, we really enjoy watching your newscast. Well, we do our best. In other words, it was a scratch your back thing in a sense, but it was not a corrupt scratch your back thing. It was not someone trying to tell you what the news was, what you ought to say about it, and whose side you ought to take. Because in those days, Mike, political reporters, we all had our views, that you couldn't cover a president or a candidate or a politician without getting to know that person, man or woman. And if you didn't have a view of what they were like, you shouldn't be in the business. But the idea was to keep your view out of your story, your view out of the report. And we tried to do that. And so it was such a different day. I mean, when I first got onto the fact that a person I'd known for 40 years now, named Donald J. Trump, I did an interview with him in 1990 for a program I was doing on ABC. And he was then not paying his bills. He lost his airline. He lost the Plaza Hotel. He was about to lose the Taj Mahal, which he had built in Atlantic City because he couldn't pay. Of course, he didn't say to me, you're right, Mr. Donaldson, I couldn't pay. He said, well, you people in the news media, and you know the particular verbiage. But I didn't care. I didn't matter about that. I just did the story. Now, of course, he controls the apparatus at the White House. Donald J. Trump is President of the United States. It's his press room in a sense, but in recent court cases, he had to learn that it was not his press room to dictate what reporter from a news organization should be assigned to that place. If you didn't want to have a press room, said the federal court, that's your privilege. You're president, and nothing in the Constitution says you have to have a press room. But if you're going to have a press room, you can't say to CNN, for instance, as they tried to do, you can't send that person. He's terrible. On live television, the CNN correspondent is told how terrible he is by the President of the United States. Well, they never told me that. They may have felt it, but it was a civil conversation between two sides which understood each other. I understood who was president, and it was not me. And the president understood why I was asking questions that may at some points be questions he wasn't prepared to answer or did not want to really try to go into any detail. People would say to me, Mike, you guys like to do gotcha questions. You figure out how to get the president. That was never true. We figured out what the news was, what American people wanted to know about his plans. I mean, are you going to send more troops to Vietnam, sir? Are you going to do this, do that? Which increasingly, for the illustration I gave you about Lyndon Johnson, became more difficult from him. And no wonder he didn't like the press. His issues were that he was failing. Today, in my judgment, the issue is that Donald J. Trump is failing, well, in the latest extent of trying to shut down the Hormuz Strait, trying to bomb Iran into the Stone Age, as he once said, sort of destroy the civilization. I mean, you have to wonder what is going on in his mind. And if you're a reporter there, you have to wonder, how can I ask him a question when I'm not going to get a straight answer? He's going to lie to me, or else he'll just tell me, in the case of a woman, oh, Peggy, he said one time recently to a female reporter, that may be a term of endearment in some households, but not particularly in the press room of the White House. So it's such a different situation, Mike. I had it so easy compared to what the good reporters in Washington today have it to try to get from this man something that makes sense as to his intentions. Of course, one of their problems is that he doesn't know what his intentions are. He doesn't know from day to day what he wants to do, how he wants to do it, how he wants to escape, for instance, now, this assault on Iran, which for many reasons people would say is the right thing to do. But as he and Bibi Netanyahu of Israel did it, it was as if, hey, it's a cakewalk. Well, no. And now he's squirming desperately to try to get out of it. And I wish him luck.
Looking back, as you just implied, you had what turns out to be the luxury of being backed by a broadcast organization, which
Yes.
at that time backed you up. Can you understand what these reporters in the White House are going through? You're trying to make your way in life. You're trying to make a career. And it's become painfully obvious to many, according to these reports, that if you are in a gaggle and you ask the wrong question, or you anger him in some way, or are not seen to be politically palatable to him, you will not get invited to the next event. You will not get the byline. Your career could be in danger. Can you sympathize with these people? And do you have any advice for them?
Well, I do sympathize with them. I watch the press room when it's available online. I watch other ways to see what's going on, and of course, I read things. But I have no sources anymore. I don't practice the trade. I'm retired. But I see the difference in the press room where I was there. There might be one or two reporters who really weren't doing a good job, but the rest of them, man, woman, big organization, small organization, were trying to get the facts on questions and answers that mattered to the American people. And they did a pretty good job. And a number of press secretaries I worked with, and I admired most of them, for the presidents that I worked with, would have to dodge and weave and handle it the best way they could. But, there were one or two notable cases, but seldom in the years I was there did a press secretary lie to me, lie to the press. And I think I could say that about most of the presidents, not all, and not on particularly all the subjects. But it was an understanding why the press was there, and an understanding of why the president might want to dodge a question that we had to ask him, someday her. And it was an atmosphere in which people generally got along. I mean, the fabled idea that you could have fights in the press room with the press secretary and then have a beer with him that night with a bunch of other people. Of course, that's what happened. It was not a personal thing, usually. With this president, everything is personal. Everything. If
But
it
can you
doesn't suit
understand?
him, he will
Um,
lash out in the worst way. Attack the Pope? Well, good luck. He doesn't have a better sense than to not do that, no matter what he feels about Pope Leo and Pope Leo's criticism of people who don't want to make the peace, uh, to attack him with 78 million Americans who are Roman Catholics in the United States and millions around the world who generally believe the vicar of Christ, as the church believes, has an idea of what God wants and how to preach the gospel according to Jesus. And when
well,
you say,
those things get reported out in the open because the Pope, for example, will just say it and it gets reported. But can you empathize in some way with the people in the White House press corps who know that their careers are on the line if they step out of line, and they may also be getting either direct or indirect uh, directions from their own employer to go easy. And they know that if they offend the president, he might not hesitate to make sure you don't get that opportunity next time that could advance your career. And I say this to a man to whom many in the White House probably still look up to as a role model. But
well,
how do you, it's not the same.
I sympathize with the situation that these reporters are in. And then the question is, how should they step up to what happens at the White House with them? Should they resist in the sense of saying, well, of course, they should not speak back to the President of the United States in the same language he speaks to them? But should they resist in the sense of insisting that he answer the question? And if he doesn't answer the question, point out to him that he hasn't answered the question. And the American public goes. I once asked a very difficult question to President Clinton, and he gave an answer which was not satisfactory and that he didn't answer the question itself. But as he turned away, I said to him, can't you just deny it, sir?
That was
With his
famously during the
accusation
Monica Lewinsky
yeah, well,
story.
no, it was another woman who claimed that she'd been sexually assaulted by him when he was governor. And the story that was on NBC was a story in all the newspapers that night at the news conference. I asked him about it because, again, it was, believe me, not a gotcha question, except it was in the public purview of the news and the allegations, very serious about the president. So I said, sir, Juanita Broaddrick claims that you raped her. If that is not true, sir, what was your relationship, if any, with Miss Broaddrick? Well, he was ready for the question. Not that we talked with his people about that, but it was in the news. Presidents in those days certainly were prepared by their staff as to what they might be having to answer. So he answered with something by saying he had just been acquitted by the United States Senate, that he might have been convicted and removed from office. He said, I've said to the American people that I would not spend any more time for the rest of my presidency in answering questions or doing things other than to help them. And that's what I intend to do. My lawyer has issued a statement. What is true, his lawyer, Mr. Kendall, had issued a statement which seemed to deny it, but no one had accused Kendall of a wrongdoing. So when he turned away, I just said to him, well, can't you deny it, sir? He didn't answer that. So what did the question accomplish? Probably nothing, but in the long run, everyone watching, no matter what their view was of the situation or they thought was the situation, came away wondering why I didn't answer the question.
As we speak about the problems that White House reporters and media have in with this administration, or say that they have, are we engaging in inside baseball amongst us media, so-called media elites, or is there something more fundamentally at stake that the American people just don't see? Because this issue is being played in the papers, but I wonder if it's really getting any traction amongst those who count the most, which is that dwindling band of people who decide the elections in the middle. What do you think?
I think it's the job of the press, and we're talking about the mainstream press. Now, anybody can say, I'm in the press, I've got a website, I have millions of people watching me, here's my view of this or that. There was no Holocaust, let me tell you something. And Lyndon Johnson was behind the assassination. You see it. But none of that junk was there when I was practicing, except toward the end of my storied career. So I keep coming back to the theme, how easy I had it. For instance, I never had to make a decision. Do I ask this question, get put down by the president? Maybe my boss, who understands that the corporation for which we work wants something from the government, and this president can control that, and will now put pressure on me to the extent of even firing me, which is happening these days, as you know. People, our own boss, Roone Arledge, for so many years, right? Was he 25 years, at that time at least, the longest serving boss of the news division of the three networks? You never had to worry that anyone who came to him complaining about me, unless he thought there was a legitimate complaint, once or twice he did call me and say, not, why did you say that, but can you tone this down? I mean, do you have to keep up? You know, look, but there was no retribution. There was no, and if you don't, in fact, I knew that he would never do that. He would take the other side. Today, reporters, in too many instances, have no confidence that their management will back them up. And so if they come back at the president in a way that says, that's not an acceptable answer, sir, I ask you this question, would you answer it? They have to worry about what it means to them, to their careers, you're right, to their income, to their family, whatever it is. I think it's despicable, but it is the situation. It's the times. I show you the times. And it's easy to blame Donald J. Trump, which I do, for the things that he says and does, which are harmful to the country and to individuals. But he is backed by a large number of American citizens. And so my question is, what do they see? What are they thinking about? Do they understand that if he becomes, or anyone, the monarch, the king, the tyrant, we have, in some sense, I have to use the usual illustration, the 1930s, we have something that this country was never. It strove to be the shining city on the hill that Ronald Reagan talked about, where people were welcome as long as they obeyed the rules and worked hard, and they had the opportunity to rise. That was the great thing that caused people to come to this country. They had an opportunity, if they seized it properly, to rise in income, to rise in comfort, to rise in things that their home country didn't give them. Well, that's disappearing. Who wants to come to the United States today?
Let me put another angle to you about this media versus the White House. Um, if the precedent is established, and it seems to be heading in that direction, that the president can do this sort of thing and get away with it simply because he has political support, and simply ignoring, I'm talking now about the general public, a large section of the public doesn't see what you and I are talking about, what you and I care about. A large section of the public is not caring about that. The polls are not saying that this is a big issue with them. Um, is it due to the fact that they have been taught from whatever age that the mainstream media is the enemy? It's bad for everybody. It's not the free press doesn't mean what we think it means. Do they understand, do you think, the fact that if these precedents are established, And if the next president is a Democrat and happens to want to do the same thing, the tracks have already been laid down for that. So it's a matter of perhaps careful what you ask for. The shoe could turn the other way.
But I've come to the belief that this large number of Americans who have now seen Donald J. Trump as the answer to all their complaints, and some of their complaints I don't want answered. If they hate the Jews, if they hate the blacks, if they hate the Muslims, sorry, guy, I'm not for giving you surcease from this unhappiness you have. But if some of their complaints are, how come we don't have adequate health care? I can't feed my family because I've been laid off from jobs. In other words, I'm for those complaints. And it may be that all the years when I was living fat, dumb, and happy in Washington as a reporter, doing pretty well, that I wasn't aware of all the people of the country who weren't doing pretty well and who saw, in a sense, once led, that it was the fault of the elites. A man like me, from a state of New Mexico, born during the Depression on a poor little farm in which we barely had enough to eat, but did, which put us above many people of the country that day. We went to a land-grant college with a gentleman's C. In those days, if you want to really go on with your education, you have to have a 4.0 on the undergraduate and go on from there. It was a different time. And I never considered myself an elite. And yet, many people, certainly egged on by Donald J. Trump, would say that people like me oppressed them. People by me didn't see them. But here's what happens. You say, well, is it all lost? No. The news media have got to continue trying to bring the facts of things. If he says the moon is made of green cheese, continue to bring the facts that it isn't and try to demonstrate to people that it's not. But his policies are bringing him down. Hey, the price of gas? Well, they don't love that. Hey, the health care that they no longer have after the 1st of January of this year, certain large 20 million people off the Obama-type subsidies, not all of them, but some of them, that will bring him down. They will turn around at some point, and all of his ability to show himself as Jesus Christ with his hand out magically. Oh, I just wanted to be a doctor. No. He's not stupid. He's shrewd. He's not dumb, but he doesn't want to pay attention to anything that would argue against what he wants to do, particularly if he has to go against the facts to do what he wants to do. He wants to do that.
A lot of people some people are beginning to use the term tyrannical democracy, which in essence means that the executive branch has seized, with the help of compliant Congress, so much power that he can ignore what half the country may have voted for and do pretty much what he wants. But that term, are we moving toward such a tyrannical democracy that if he's replaced by a Democrat, what if a Democrat decides to be like that?
Well, Democrats are not pure.
As I said before, those precedents could have been set already, and it wouldn't be difficult for a Democrat to step in and do the same thing to a weakened media, to a weakened media landscape of corporate ownership that is so afraid of having their license revoked that they'll succumb to any administration, no matter whether it's Democrat or Republican. That seems to me to be a real danger.
That's the way we've been headed. But I see at the moment, if not just a standstill, but a reversal from the standpoint of the majority of the American people. Okay, forget the polls, which says he's got 37% approval rating. The polls on any given day will reflect whatever way the question is asked and what have you. But what's now engaging American people is the economy, the grocery store, the gas station. Well, whose fault is that? Well, it's Barack Obama's fault. We know that. We hear it from him all the time. It was, certainly Joe Biden's fault, poor old Joe. We hear it from all the time. Not once has this president ever said, and I can categorize times when other presidents I've covered have said it, I made a mistake. I'm changing course because I believe this, that, and the other. He will never admit he's made any mistake about anything. And I think people are getting onto the fact that look what happened in Minneapolis. It was too much ICE. It was too much rounding up. It was too much initially the ability to say, well, so a couple of people we shot, we had to do that because they were, it's just, what? Finally, people took to the streets. People power reversed that course. He had to remove the man who was head of the ICE agents at that time and bring in someone, Tom Harmon, who could say, let's tone it down, let's do something a little different. Public pressure is important. And at the moment, it is building against him. He's done it to himself. He said when he campaigned, I'm one president who's not going to get us into wars. We're not going to have continuous wars. I'm against war. Ha! He's bragged about removing the maybe corrupt, but elected leader of Venezuela, as if we had the right to do that because we just thought he was a bad guy. Bad guy or not. He's claimed that he's stopped wars in 6 or 7 countries. The claims are all suspect, except one, maybe. And in fact, then under pressure from Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, one of the things Mr. Netanyahu wants to do is stay out of jail. As long as he continues a war-like atmosphere, the charges against him for years have been hanging there in the judicial system of Israel. And many people would say, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. That he has to answer for in court could be suspended. So he's been on pressure to keep things boiling. He is not responsible for the terrible massacre of 1,250 Israelis in October of 2 years ago. No, that's Hamas. That's the people who want to bring down Israelis and kill them all. And you don't blame Israelis for wanting to retaliate. But the latest count is that they've killed 53,000 Palestinians in Gaza. 53,000. There's no equivalency here. And yet, Netanyahu, clearly, according to all the testimony you can get, usually behind the concealment of who was giving it to you, but someone who knew, who was persuaded Donald J. Trump to strike Iran. Hey, a year and a half ago, with the huge bombers, he struck Iran and proclaimed that Iran's nuclear ability was dead for all time, not just dead for a while. He said it was destroyed. Well, now he says, in the lead up to the striking of Iran in 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, that they were within maybe a week of being able to produce an atomic bomb. No, sir. No, I mean, say whatever you want, but that's not true. According to his own, our own agencies, CIA, other agencies that look at the intelligence. He says anything he wants that he believes helped what he wants to do. So he and Prime Minister Netanyahu struck Iran. And Iran, instead of folding up, even though they killed the leaders, killed about 11 people, including the Ayatollah Khamenei, his son now has taken over and is said to be even more radical to destroy Israel than was his father. Well, good for you. Putting frying pan into the fire. What I'm saying and rambling on is Donald Trump has no plan. I have a plan to end the war, maybe in 2 weeks. Maybe it'll take a month. Yesterday, as we speak, he said, well, these gas prices may consist high up until next fall. Well, good luck if you think the American public is going to elect him. Well, I said Republicans. You mentioned Congress a while ago. Our founding fathers made it Article 1 of the Constitution. Closest to the people. had the most power, had a weak presidency. They didn't want a king, except in time of war, and then the president becomes a commander-in-chief and has great power. And then, of course, the courts to try to adjudicate disputes among the first two branches in other ways. And this Congress, with Donald J. Trump, has been the lapdog. I mean, the Republicans, with very few exceptions, a few notable ones, whatever he wants, whatever he's done. We had the Speaker of the House last year keep the House out of session for over a month so that a person who had just been elected as a Democrat would not take a seat and change the balance of power on a particular issue. That is the Epstein files, whatever Donald J. Trump wants. And these people are elected by the people in their states. Let's
Sam,
see
I want
who
to wrap
try
this
to
up
get
by,
reelected.
I'm sorry. I wanted to wrap this up by taking a leaf out of your book and put you on the spot. What would you do if you were at the White House as a reporter under today's circumstances? And your critics will be looking at this question saying, aha, gotcha, because you talk a big game, but you had all the freedom you needed when you were a reporter. Put yourself in their shoes today.
It's a fair question, but you don't have a fair marketplace for the question. I'm 92. There's nothing you can do to me. I can't help. I'm retired. Whatever little money I have, I was able to save, may or may not, if I tend to live to be 106. That's ridiculous. He can't threaten me. My job. He can't threaten me, call me a name. I interviewed him in 1990 because he was failing, according to Forbes magazine. And during the interview, he called me dumb. He said, if you were smart, you'd want to see my books. I said, send the books. We'll hire a mutually agreeable firm. I can't read your books to know what it is. I might do that. I'm still waiting for the books. He said, I was out to get him. People like you are out to get me. I wasn't out to get him at that time at all. I was asking him legitimate questions. Yeah.
I'm going to ask it a different way, Sam.
Yes. I mean,
What if you were?
I just tried to answer your question in the sense that I'm
No,
not going back to the White House. People.
No, you answered the question as to Sam Donaldson today, and it's my fault for not rephrasing it. What about if you were a young reporter in today's White House, knowing what you know, with your wisdom and experience, put yourself in those shoes, what would you do?
It's impossible. I'm not going to advise reporters, get in there and fight, as I sit on the sidelines with my retirement, and their careers, their lives, their families, their future is up for grabs. And this man at the moment may have the ability to cut it short. I'm not going to say, get in there. What's wrong with you? Don't you understand? The freedom of the press depends on the press doing its job. No, someone else could egg them on. We can point out, you and I, the differences between the eras and why we acted the way we did, and usually successfully in finding the facts after some investigation of what had been going on. And not necessarily being rewarded. We kept our jobs and maybe got promoted, but we were never under the gun of being fired if we didn't do what was politically correct for our companies or for our viewers, or as that goes. I watched the television today and I'm appalled at some of the ways that companies have to try to find an audience. We found an audience only because we said, here's the news that we think you ought to pay attention to, and here's the, but we didn't have to make up things. I mean, I watch a program occasionally, which begins not with an anchor person saying good evening, this, that, the other, but good evening. Moments ago, this happened. There was a shooting, and we'll have a report now. We have a sense of urgency, a sense of creating, of immediacy, and meaning an immediacy with a hint that there are things that are problems here. And then later on, we'll see a pig that's jumped a pig. Pets, here we have the video. It's a kind of a newscast for people come to who don't really care about the news, but they want to be entertained, and it's very successful. And in a
You,
sense, I can't blame a company saying, if I just did a Walter Cronkite type broadcast, and I watched one in 1963 that had 4 items in half an hour. First, Nikita Khrushchev had been ousted as the leader of the Soviet Union. 2, the president of the United States, who was running for election, his top aide had been caught in the YMCA with another man, which in those days was a terrible thing. 3, China had exploded its first atomic weapon. And finally, the long-term prime minister of Britain had been ousted because his party lost the election. Good night. That's the news. I didn't see a pig jumping his butt. I didn't see a little funny video of a child. Oh, see the child. The child's okay, you know. But today, there are still important things. Maybe it wouldn't fill a half hour with that kind of important items, one after another, but important things. And so when I watch what's happening in the Middle East, I want to know what's the latest in the Hormuz Strait. What's the latest on the president's rhetoric about bombing them back to the Stone Age, when clearly bombing them had not done the job, but just more, kill them all? In other words, I'm being overly dramatic here, but the newscasts that I watch sometimes, some places, are simply desperately trying to maintain enough of an audience to pay the bills. And it can't get an audience that just is interested in the hard news facts of 2026 in the world.
I'm going to jump in and use a phrase that you almost made famous, I think, when you were sitting in the front row of the briefing room and you didn't get the answer that you were looking for, or you wanted more. This is just one follow-up. And my follow-up is, if you feel that the country is moving toward a situation in which the news media no longer enjoys its informal role of adversarial relationship with government, checks, an informal check, as it were, if we're moving in that direction, what's going to be the impact of that overall?
We're moving in that direction, but he can't control the direction, obviously. Things are not going well. And when things are not going well, you have to blame someone. And from the very get-go, it was the news media, of course, the fake news media, this news media. I mean, the New York Times, the Washington Post, go down the line. You asked that question. It's a rotten question. I mean, he set the stage by continuing trying to tell the American public that the news media, except for his specific channels that he loved or people that he loved, was all corrupt and all wrong. Well, we saw the big lie again in the 30s. If you keep telling people the same thing over and over again, and particularly if you keep other units from being able to counter it, well, of course they're going to believe it. Of course they're going to believe it. Yet he's not going to win, Mike. He cannot win. There are enough Americans, some of them who have been persuaded to believe in him, who no longer believe in him, but just basically people who weren't political. They didn't pay much attention to politics. They may have voted from time to time, but not like you, not like me, not like the people we were talking about in the press room. They had attention to their own lives. They're not going to stand for, if they can stop it, and they can stop it, Minnesota, Minneapolis, they can stop it. They're not going to stand for this man for his own individual, personal, cruel needs to destroy the country. Won't happen.
Sam, thank you very much. It's always an absolute pleasure to be with you.
Well, Mike, I've enjoyed talking to you, but when I say I apologize, it's who I am. I start rambling. I start getting emotional. I'm not capable, I guess, of calmly collecting my thoughts in the English language in a way that you could think of, that, hey, that makes sense, or it doesn't make sense. But I do feel, although I'm on the sideline, he can't do anything to me or my family. Uh, I do feel that people in the press today have it so much tougher. And so many of them are doing as good a job as they could possibly do. There's so many of them haven't. Someone I've never met, I imagine you may have met her. I watch her now on CNN, Clarissa Ward. Clarissa Ward, you know, I mean, she's a woman, which is fine. I think she's a great reporter, a foreign correspondent. And Dana Bagshaw. There are many women today that I think have long since proved that gender is not the test of a good reporter. It's the other things, and that women, as well as men, can do them as well and in some cases better than we can or did. But I don't have to compete against that, so I can say that, right?
Sam, you can say that because you are an American.
I'm proud to be American. Some people say, I got to move from the country. I'm going to Portugal. I mean, Canada, maybe, the far seas. No. Breathe there a man with soul so dead that to himself hath never said, this is my own, my native land. I've forgotten the poet who said that, but that's the way I feel about the country. It has been good to me, it's been good to my ancestors. It's been good to many people, and it's hurt many people. Civil rights, of course, we will need to get into, but the effort has made progress in fits and starts, is not all there yet for all Americans, regardless of their religion or the color of their skin or their origin, as long as they, again, are good citizens and obey the rules and work hard. There's no distinction as to what rights they have or how they should be treated. But we're working on it. We've been working on it. He's reversed it. He's reversed it, of course. I'll bet you the Supreme Court, though, doesn't side with his view of the 14th Amendment, which is always thought that if you're born in the United States under its jurisdiction, I don't care how you got there, if your mother gives birth to you, you are an American citizen. No. He wants to say it was only meant for the sons and daughters of slaves and this, that, and the other. So maybe there should be a test as to whether you should be an American citizen. Sorry. This Supreme Court finally began to turn around. It said it's okay to use the National Guard in Los Angeles and maybe even in Portland, Oregon. But when it came to Chicago, suddenly realized that he wants to send the National Guard in to curb the great city of Chicago. No, can't do that. And then in other ways, it's gone against some of the tariff case. It's a big one. Oh, I'm going to get around it. I use those kind of law here. I'm going to put a tariff on I want to. I'm the boss. I am El Supremo. No, you're not. If the courts have their way. If the courts have their way, and the Supreme Court has set the stage, no matter what he brings to them next, as the law that he's now using to try to enforce tariffs just because he says so, 100% Canada, this, that, and the other. No president has the right to do that under our Constitution. Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, but that's the view I hold from the standpoint of lawyers who are. I just think we're going through such a difficult time. You say, well, such a civil war? No, I think maybe World War II was a pretty bad time. Although in retrospect, we were going to win. We had the power. We had the security behind oceans. We had the ability to produce airplanes, battleships, all those things. But at the time, it was pretty little kid, but pretty dicey.